As we begin our dialogue with these amazing panelists, we will have translation services, and Spanish will be on channel 1 and English on channel 5. So just want to make sure that you have that as we begin. What you may not know about this region is that during the pandemic, 1 in 3 county residents suffered with food insecurity. We are lucky that we have made those numbers decrease, but we still have 1 in 10 county residents who struggle with food insecurity in LA County, which is over 1 million people. So this is a very timely and important conversation. So our first speaker, I know we're all excited to hear from her, is Samantha Power, the Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development. Power has served as USAID Administrator since May 2021 and leads USAID's global staff of over 10,000 people working in some 100 countries around the world. She is the first USAID Administrator to be a member of the National Security Council, which gives her a central role in ensuring that development plays a critical role in America's responses to a range of economic, humanitarian, and geopolitical issues. From 2013 to 2017, Power served as President Obama's U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and was President Obama's Human Rights Advisor from 2009 to 2013. She's an author and editor of multiple books and the recipient of the 2003 Pulitzer Prize for Nonfiction. So I will turn it over to you to start.
Thank you so much, Elise, and thank you all for bearing with us here as we work through our tech challenges. I'm incredibly grateful to the Pacific Council on International Policy, our partner in putting on this event. It took a major team effort to pull this event together to be responsive really to real world needs, a real crisis, as you said, that is gripping communities near and far. Thank you to Board Chair Richard Getz and your President and CEO Gerald Green for being here. I've had the honor of participating in Pacific Council events in the past, and it is great to be here in your home base of Los Angeles. Finally, just to thank in advance my fellow panelists for convening from all over the world, from Haiti, from Honduras and Argentina, to join this discussion. I can't think of a more urgent topic to bring us to the table today, and that is really what people want from this Summit of the Americas. They want leaders, civil society, the private sector to come together to be tackling real world challenges in the here and now and being nimble in so doing. Then from 2020 to 2021, fertilizer prices spiked due to a combination of energy costs, increased demand, and supply chain disruptions caused by COVID-19. And this led, as we all know, to even higher food prices. And with that, a greater number of people in Latin America and the Caribbean facing severe food insecurity. You all know the statistics. The war came along, and in so doing, we learned more than any of us expected to learn about what Ukraine in particular adds to the global market in terms of food. Russia and Ukraine produce close to a third of the world's traded wheat and barley, a fifth of its maize, and over half of its sunflower oil. Supplies that many countries here in the Americas also desperately need. The war has rendered around a third of Ukrainian crops and farmland useless, removing them from the market, removing nearly 27 million tons of wheat, corn, and barley. And this year alone, globally, up to 40 million additional people could be pushed into poverty and food insecurity due to the effects of the war. That's 40 million globally, as I said, but that includes right here in the Americas. Food prices, and we will hear more detail on this, across Latin America are the highest in a generation. In Venezuela, nearly a third of the population is food insecure. And up to 4 million people in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras will likely require months of emergency food assistance as they confront acute hunger and food insecurity. Today's crisis requires a comprehensive approach, working to meet immediate needs of those facing severe food insecurity, but also addressing the roots of global hunger to sustainably help countries move past the need for food assistance. Nobody wants to be a recipient of food assistance. Not here, not anywhere. Today, the Biden-Harris administration is announcing $331 million in new funding for food security and humanitarian assistance in the Americas. While some of this money will address other humanitarian needs, like hygiene supplies and emergency shelter materials and the like, most of it will go toward food security. The new funding includes significant new food assistance for El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, where millions face severe food insecurity. For Haiti, where 40% of the population, more than half of them children, urgently require food supplies. And for Colombia, one of the many countries in the region where year-on-year food inflation reached double digits between 2021 and 2022. And later this week, we'll be able to share announcements about additional new emergency food assistance to Venezuelans inside their country and those living throughout Latin America in countries that have generously welcomed them as refugees. When the summit ends on Friday, the United States expect to have committed over $500 million to meet urgent food and humanitarian needs in the region. And yet, as we know so well, the food crisis in the Americas will not be solved solely through emergency food assistance. Far from it. It requires a long-term solution, one that sees Latin and Central American communities as partners rather than recipients. Today, 1/3 of the world's food is produced right here in the Americas. The current crisis presents an opportunity for the region to not just help end the pressing food crisis here in the Americas, but to supply an even greater share of the world's food supply. If we can invest in the farmers and agricultural communities, that will help us meet that goal. And that's why of the amount of $331 million that I have announced, $132 million of that funding is going to support long-term efforts to build food security and resilience in Central and South America. That means supporting smallholder farmers across the region to increase their crop yields and incomes while withstanding shocks from climate change and high fertilizer prices. And it also means providing financial and technical assistance to support maternal and child nutrition through health and food initiatives. This is building on the agricultural, Feed the Future, and other food security work that USAID has been doing for some time. Over the course of this summit, President Biden will engage personally with leaders from our two continents in an effort to build partnerships and increase our regional production of food. And we are working with American fertilizer producers to help mitigate global fertilizer shortages, move countries away from dependence on Russian fertilizer, and increase investments in agricultural innovations like drought-tolerant seeds and precision agriculture to increase yields, even in the face of climate change. The food crisis that we are here to discuss today is dire, but we know from history that there is much we can accomplish within our own hemisphere. The very start of the Green Revolution began in our hemisphere, when Norman Borlaug arrived in Mexico to develop and cultivate semi-dwarf wheat varieties that will go on to make up 95% of Mexico's wheat and double global grain supplies before the end of the 20th century. My own agency's founding was rooted in strengthening food security and nutrition throughout the hemisphere. One of USAID's first ever programs began in 1962, Operation Niños, an initiative that in its first 3 years provided nutritious daily meals for more than 15 million children across Latin America. And since then, our Feed the Future program is working in 6 countries in the hemisphere. I deeply look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists about all that they think can be done to deepen our work, to strengthen food security, to learn from one another in real time so that we can adapt to the needs as they arise. And I'm so grateful to our fellow panelists for their work on what could not be a more urgent or important cause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. Arturo has been leading ECA's members in the urgent work of seeking practical and region-wide solutions to the food crisis, which he will speak about today. As citizen of Argentina, Dr. Arturo has held roles at ECA since 1988 and has also served in the Ministry of Agriculture of Argentina and as a representative of the agricultural sectors of North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean at the UN Food Systems Summit. Turn it over to you.
Muchas gracias, Liz. Buenos días a todos y a todas. Quiero agradecer a las autoridades del Pacific Council of International Trade y como verán voy a hablar en español honrando a la lengua que es más importante en nuestro continente, con el debido permiso de todos ustedes. Quiero agradecer a los miembros del panel, a la administradora Samantha Power, al excelentísimo señor ministro de Honduras y a los distinguidos miembros del panel. Y decir inicialmente que coincido plenamente con el diagnóstico que hizo la administradora Samantha Power sobre el problema que estamos enfrentando. Es un problema serio sobre seguridad alimentaria mundial y que exige que desde nuestro continente asumamos la responsabilidad que tenemos que asumir porque somos los garantes de la seguridad alimentaria del mundo y también de la sostenibilidad ambiental. Yo quisiera enfatizar los problemas que estamos enfrentando. El continente venía de una baja tasa de crecimiento en el 2019 y en el 2020. Nos enfrentamos al COVID y fuimos la región en el mundo que más se vio afectada, con una caída del Producto Interno Bruto del 7%, casi el doble de la caída del Producto Interno Bruto mundial. Estamos sufriendo eventos climáticos extremos permanentemente. Y el señor ministro de Honduras puede atestiguar lo que pasa en el Triángulo Norte, lo que pasa en los países del Mercosur, lo que pasa en California. Y por eso, como bien decía la administradora, necesitamos una agricultura más resiliente. Bueno, y ahora el conflicto bélico en Europa del Este, que ha generado un incremento en el precio de los alimentos, en el precio de los fertilizantes y de la energía. La agricultura es un sector altamente dependiente de la energía. Entonces, se profundiza un círculo vicioso en donde pobreza, seguridad alimentaria, inclusión, migraciones se están retroalimentando. El tema tenemos que verlo desde una dimensión agregada y luego ponerle la lupa a cada país o a cada subregión. Si lo vemos a nivel agregado, tenemos una noticia importante y es que somos la región exportadora neta de alimentos más grande del mundo. La tendencia es creciente, o sea que 1 de cada 3 toneladas en el mundo viene de nuestro continente. Somos un actor realmente relevante y lo vamos a hacer aún más en el futuro. Esa es la buena noticia, que evidentemente depende de algunos países, y acá señalo Brasil, Argentina, obviamente Estados Unidos y Canadá. Pero además de esos países exportadores, en donde por cada dólar que se importa se generan $10 de exportaciones, tenemos los países importadores, que son además, padecen las consecuencias de la vulnerabilidad climática, y acá quiero reiterar el Triángulo Norte, que tiene muy serios problemas, los países del Caribe Oriental, serios problemas, muy serios problemas, y Haití, que el tema va a ser tratado porque la primera prioridad se tendría que llamar Haití. Entonces, en nuestro continente hay exportadores e importadores, y la primera reflexión es que bueno sería si tuviésemos más comercio intrarregional. Nuestro continente solamente tiene el 14% de comercio intrabloque, versus Europa al 65%. Bueno, el Tratado de Comercio en el Hemisferio Norte, que es un 45%. Entonces, comercio intrarregional tendría que ser una prioridad, y esta es una de las primeras acciones concretas que me parece que tendríamos que emprender. Señalo otra, tenemos que desvincular el conflicto bélico de la producción, de las exportaciones y del abastecimiento. Está consagrado en la Constitución de las Naciones Unidas de 1948 el tema de que el derecho a la alimentación es sagrado. Entonces tendría que haber un esfuerzo por separar ese conflicto bélico que tanto nos duele del derecho a la alimentación. Tenemos que asegurar financiamiento a nuestros agricultores para que la rueda de la agricultura no pare. Son 16.5 millones, sobre todo de pequeños agricultores, y necesitamos que esas campañas agrícolas sigan funcionando, porque si no el problema puede ser agravado. Cuarta propuesta, necesitamos crear más instancias de diálogo y monitorear el tema de los precios y el tema de los fertilizantes. Si nuestro continente tiene una parte débil, un eslabón débil, es en el tema de los fertilizantes. Y ahí tenemos que hacer más agricultura regenerativa, más agricultura de precisión, investigar mucho más los temas de ciencia e innovación. Y termino con los temas de largo plazo. Es ciencia e innovación y más ciencia e innovación. Necesitamos acceder a la nueva frontera del conocimiento para reducir las brechas de productividad que son enormes en nuestro continente. Para cualquier cadena que ustedes elijan, la brecha de productividad es 10 a 1. Entonces necesitamos elevar rápidamente los índices de productividad, y el USDA tiene propuestas realmente muy interesantes. Tenemos que incluir a la agricultura familiar en los temas de extensión y de cooperativismo. Y insistir con el comercio y la integración. Quería terminar diciendo que en una reunión que tuvimos hoy, hablábamos de la Alianza Mundial para la Seguridad Alimentaria, Alianza Global. Tendríamos que tener una alianza continental, una alianza en las Américas, para que nuestro continente se proyecte al mundo y asuma la responsabilidad, porque eso significa más empleos, más ingresos y, por supuesto, mayor calidad de vida. Y como dijo la administradora Power, necesitamos una nueva Great Revolution. Está todo a nuestro alcance, necesitamos más instituciones, por supuesto, más inversión, y los resultados van a surgir. Muchas gracias a todos.
Very much. Our next speaker is Honduran Foreign Minister Enrique Reina. Foreign Minister Reina serves in the administration of President Xiomara Castro, and he has also served at several high-profile posts in the administration of former Honduran President Jose Manuel Zelaya, including Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Communications and Private Secretary to the President, and head of the Honduran mission to the United States in Washington, D.C. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you for being here in Los Angeles. To continue in Spanish, I'm colleague. Gracias. Efectivamente, para mí es un grato honor compartir esta mesa también con Samantha y los distinguidos panelistas que hablamos sobre este tema. Lejos estoy de ser un experto en seguridad alimentaria, pero al menos en nuestro trabajo en las cancillerías nos toca enfrentar obviamente ese impacto cuando tenemos que buscar apoyo, cooperación o mejores prácticas para nuestros países, a la vez inversión. Recibimos con beneplácito el anuncio de la administración Biden de incrementar los fondos destinados al desarrollo y inversión en Honduras. Creo que eso y en Centroamérica, en Triángulo Norte y en las Américas en general. Creo que eso es muy importante, pero efectivamente compartimos en esta experiencia que viven nuestros países ya de por sí afectados, vulnerables al tema del cambio climático. Honduras fue afectada en el 2021 por dos grandes huracanes, ETA y IOTA, que provocaron cerca de $20.000 millones en pérdidas en las zonas más importantes y productivas del país, tanto en la parte industrial como en la parte agrícola. Honduras ha tenido una tradición histórica de ser un país productor de ciertos bienes agrícolas como el banano, como el café, como el melón, los camarones y otra serie de productos. Y en algún momento también de haber sido autosuficiente en la producción interna en los sectores rurales, en cultivos importantes, históricos y tradicionales como lo que son el maíz blanco y los frijoles. Obviamente todos estos impactos externos han provocado severos cambios en la matriz de producción de nuestros productos internos y hasta procesos que han sido beneficiosos en otras áreas como el CAFTA y el Tratado de Libre Comercio, que han beneficiado al incremento de exportaciones y mayor inversión, pero también han afectado al campo. En el caso del campo, esta producción de maíz blanco que no puede competir con el maíz que ingresa a precios más bajos de otras naciones, entre ellas los Estados Unidos, hace que esa construcción rural que tienen los campesinos en sus pequeños cultivos, a veces de autosuficiencia, no pueden competir. Entonces, como decía el director general de ICA, todo se integra también en las consecuencias y esto provoca primero migración a las ciudades, cuando no hay empleo, migración fuera del país. Entonces, si unimos a estos, como decían, el tema de la pandemia, la destrucción de pequeños negocios y ahora los impactos que se viven precisamente con el tema de la guerra en Ucrania, el alza de los precios de los fertilizantes, el alza de los precios del acceso a granos tan importantes como el trigo para nuestras naciones, pues la cosa se complica más. La presidenta Xiomara Castro, que es la primera mujer presidenta de Honduras, ha buscado desde un inicio atacar estos problemas de base. Somos un país, y hay que reconocerlo, con más del 70% en extrema pobreza. Se han identificado en el país más de 1.400 o casi 1.600 familias que viven en extrema pobreza. Es parte de sus programas precisamente atender y dirigirse a atender a esas pequeñas familias que en muchos casos son familias rurales que se dedican a la agricultura. En este caso se ha implementado por el gobierno lo que se llama como el bono tecnológico. Es un bono que va dirigido a apoyar a todos estos productores, desde pequeños y medianos, proveerles de recursos, acceso a créditos, fertilizantes y otros mecanismos que les permitan al menos sobrepasar algunos de los problemas que tienen. Igualmente está buscando reactivar algunas de las bancas estatales que producen créditos, como el Banco Nacional de Desarrollo Agrícola y también el Banco de Producción de la Vivienda. Obviamente todos estos temas se entrelazan, pero creemos que sí, efectivamente tenemos que trabajar juntos. Tenemos que trabajar juntos porque estos impactos generan consecuencias para todos. Además tenemos otros factores, si no son las inundaciones, a veces las sequías, a veces el acceso a los recursos más básicos como los servicios, el agua, y lo incluimos en programas como los que decía en el momento Samantha. También la presidenta Castro ha buscado un mecanismo de merienda escolar para apoyar a cientos, prácticamente millones de niñas y niños en Honduras que puedan regresar a la escuela y que han perdido ya una brecha de más de año y medio de no ir a clases porque las condiciones de acceso en sistemas electrónicos son casi imposibles cuando hay comunidades en Honduras que ni siquiera tienen acceso a la luz eléctrica. Entonces conocemos esta realidad y como tal hay que trabajar en ella, conocemos la responsabilidad nuestra como Estado, pero también creemos que los programas que se puedan desarrollar con ICA, con USAID y con otras vertientes son muy importantes para trabajar en enfrentar estas realidades y naturalmente los esfuerzos que se pueden hacer para generar espacios de mayor seguridad alimentaria, de combatir mejor experiencias, de eficientar la producción agrícola y volver realmente al campo, nos pueden ayudar a todos. Agradezco pues, enormemente esta invitación nuevamente a USAID, a Pacific Council, a International Trade, y es un honor estar aquí con ustedes. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Gael Pressoir. He is the Dean for the Faculty of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences at Port-au-Prince and also part of the newly formed Haiti Food Systems Alliance. He is a Haitian national trained as an applied plant geneticist and has made the university the leading agricultural research innovation hub in Haiti. His research team currently collaborates with crop scientists around the world, and he leads a range of efforts related to improving plant breeding, animal nutrition, and food science for Haitian farmers. So I'll turn it over to you, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Administrator Power, to talk about it all starts, producing more starts with improved seeds and talking about Norlo. Thank you also, Manuel, to highlight the importance of science and innovation, and from that I'll start my speech. So the weakening of Haiti's agriculture is a long story. We're actually currently working on a policy paper to explain that trajectory and how to change course, if not the curse. The main lesson is that for over 40 years, our policy has been to try to make the price of food lower for the urban slum dwellers. And our farmers and our overall economy has paid dearly for that policy, a policy that favors imports over production. It didn't make sense in the early 80s when it started, because well over 50% of the population were farmers. And it still doesn't make sense today, as still 40% of the Haitians are farmers. As a result, Haiti is sending migrants all across Latin America and into the US. So there's a benefit for us. We get more money transfer, but to purchase imported food. This is not a good economic model. And at one point, we need to change that. As a result of this and the current crisis, food crisis around the world, and I will not go over the reasons that have been mentioned by my co-panelists, hunger levels are rising in Haiti. And something I would like to say are careful thoughts for everyone. Hell is sometimes paved with good intents. Please do no evil. The international community and USAID should not undermine long-term resilience by shifting resources for short-term rescue operations. Relief is necessary. Please, I understand, but make local procurement as often as possible. And let the Haitian farmers benefit from high prices. It's going to be good for them because then they're going to plant more and produce more. And as mentioned, we are part of the Alliance for Local Production, Haiti Food System Alliance, but there are others also, and we can help. We're building alliances of farmer researchers, university, and private companies that can facilitate access to food production. So food aid should never be imported when local production is available. And USAID has placed localization at the heart of its reform initiative. Thank you, Administrator Power. Yet funding to local organization has increased from 4% to 6%, but we still can go a little bit higher. We are actually now transferring these technologies to other Latin American countries. We're transferring them to Honduras, and with the help of Zamorano University, and to Costa Rica. And USAID Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement is key to this transfer. Haitian technology, as weird as it may sound, are now making their way to other developing countries. We are also working with various USAID innovation labs, the Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement, Sorghum and Millet Innovation Lab, and the Sustainable Intensification Innovation Lab. We've worked with Canada Global Affairs, support from the Kellogg Foundation, and also mentioned that are investing in science innovation, the Haitian Central Bank, the Ministry of Agriculture, and even private companies like Reina, Heineken, that are working to improve Haiti's agriculture. This is key. We're not the only one to do it. A company like Accesso in Haiti has received support from the Peanut Innovation Lab to work on complex issues like aflatoxins. And they're currently still testing new disease resistance and drought tolerance. So research innovation, Manuel said, is key. So research and collaboration is key. We need more alliance, university, private sector, farmers. So that's north-south collaboration and also south-south collaboration. We need more collaboration between savvy innovators. I heard it and I'm very, very pleased. We need a green revolution. Haiti needs it more than others because we didn't yet have our green revolution. And it requires research and collaboration. So I'm glad that Manuel and Administrator Power have mentioned it. We also need more collaborative spaces for new businesses to be incubated, to grow, and a new generation of entrepreneurs to be trained. Currently, Kiskeya University, with the help of many partners, is trying to build a new campus in Haiti's rural areas in the middle of the Central Plateaus to train young people to become entrepreneurs, for them to have time to incubate their businesses, because it takes time, not a project. And for private sector and universities to work together. The Haiti Food System Alliance is building such a collaborative space. It's a real win-win collaboration driven by local organizations, researchers, companies, and buyers. And we just received the $2 million from the Kellogg Foundation to support this work and basically bridging the gap between the farmers and the whole food system and be able to address some of these issues. And we can do more with your support. Supporting Haiti's agribusinesses, supporting Haiti's farm sector is important. So local procurement for relief. And if our farmers and consumers need relief, we subsidize our farmers to do it. In every crisis, there are opportunities. Higher prices can be bad for consumers, but it's good for farmers. So let us help both by strengthening our economy, I think.
And our final speaker is Reina Segura. Segura is the Deputy Program Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at International Crisis Group, the international NGO working to prevent and respond to deadly conflict. She started her career as a journalist in Colombia and has served as Associate Director of the Conflict Prevention and Peace Forum of the Social Science Research Council. In this capacity, she led over 100 research projects and workshops examining challenges to democratic governance and peace in Latin America and the Caribbean on topics including drug policy, climate change, food resilience, and gender. International Crisis Group is working to strengthen our understanding of the role of food insecurity in conflict, and this is an issue that was a central focus of discussion last month at the UN Security Council, making Segura's perspective a fitting way to close this first part of our panel. So I'll turn it over to you, Reina.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Pacific Council and USAID for having me today. It seems a bit awake. So I wanted to briefly speak about the ways in which we have seen from Crisis Group how food insecurity overlaps with violence and conflict in Latin America, given that that is our mission. And I should say, like Mr. Reina, I'm not an expert on food insecurity, but Crisis Group's work is based on field work. We have analysts that are living in the countries that we cover, and this is an issue that every single day comes up in their work and in the research. So it's definitely something that is very central to the questions of violence and conflict today in Latin America. And perhaps the first and most obvious conclusion that we can say about how this is happening throughout the countries that we cover is that food insecurity makes communities much more vulnerable to criminal actors. People who are food insecure are easily extorted. When there is forced confinement, food insecurity is obviously a central question of how communities have to comply with these criminal actors. And there's easier recruitment when people have extended and prolonged food insecurity. It makes people vulnerable to the powers of these criminal groups. Yet, in each of the countries and the regions that we cover, we have seen specific particularities of how this works. So I just want to briefly throw a couple of ideas at what we've seen in different places. In Mexico, for example, we have seen that criminal groups are using food insecurity to consolidate their criminal governance. In many of the areas in Mexico, as you well know, criminal groups are true contesters of state power. And in some of these areas, particularly after climate shocks, we have seen what is called narco-despensas, which is essentially packages of aid that the criminal groups, the cartels, are providing the communities as a way to both buy their goodwill in cases where the government is not fulfilling those expectations, but also as a way of consolidating their power as the criminal governance in these areas. We have also seen in Central America how climate events have contributed, particularly around the drought corridor, to increase migration, both from the rural areas to the cities and then from the cities north. And naturally, we all know that migrants are very much exposed to, are much more vulnerable to being victims of the violent groups. And that we have seen extensively throughout the Northern Triangle, where in particular, groups of campesinos, people that are coming to from the rural areas into the cities and have no networks, are easily recruited by the gangs in many of these cities. There's also been an interesting thing that we've seen recently in Central America, which is protests around food insecurity and people demanding that the governments in the area, in the region, respond specifically about this question. And as we saw, that was something that also was present in the Colombian strikes of 2020. It's definitely the possibility that extreme food insecurity will lead to social unrest. It's something that we should not take discount. In Colombia, on the other hand, as you well know, and it would take me the rest of the time to speak about the role that the crisis of the rural areas had in the conflict, and in particular in the negotiations in Havana between the Colombian government and the FARC. We can talk about that in the Q&A if there's interest. But there's been a particular phenomenon between in those areas where there is coca cultivation that we have seen recently. So when the FARC controlled a lot of these areas prior to 2016 and the signing of the peace agreement, the FARC used to make the campesino families in those areas cultivate what we call pancogen, so essentially grow plantain and corn and other things that they could feed their families from. And the FARC actually enforced this in many of the areas where coca was being cultivated. Now that the FARC has left these regions, new criminal groups have come, and they have actually prohibited a lot of these campesino families from cultivating any other crop except coca, because they are interested in having as much coca being sold to them, which has in turn increased the food insecurity for these families. During COVID, for example, the lockdowns were very severe in the countryside in Colombia, and many of these families that were dependent exclusively of the coca trade, which for a while was suspended, had severe insecurity. As I was mentioning earlier, in many regions of Colombia, the Gulf Clan and other post-paramilitary groups have imposed forced confinement, which has resulted in very serious food insecurity. And this has particularly happened in the North Coast, where agro-industries, this I think is very related to what Gareth was speaking about Haiti. Agro-industries in the Caribbean area have drained underground water supplies, which has affected the possibility of campesino families from growing their own particular crops. So we're seeing tensions in that area, social protests, but definitely the campesinos in this region are mobilizing to demand that the agro-industries do not impede their traditional crop growing. And finally, I would be remiss if I don't obviously mention the way in which food insecurity has become politicized in Venezuela, how it has been an issue used by the government, but sometimes also by the opposition to push their political agenda very much at the expense of the people who are hungry, which, as the administrator was mentioning, is one-third of the population. Our groups often control the food supplies both in urban centers and in the cities. And it is interesting because we're just finalizing a report about Venezuelans present in dark groups in Colombia, and every single one of them spoke about food insecurity, both as a reason for migrating and also as a reason for joining these criminal groups, because it is the only way for them to eat, but also to be able to send money back home to make their families be able to buy food. So a number of different phenomena throughout the region, but definitely we're seeing the question of food insecurity and the crisis of the families that have traditionally lived out of agriculture as a central part of the violence in Latin America.
Thank you. So as we close out our panel, I'm just going to ask our panelists two closing questions. I think we've heard unique perspectives on this issue of food security in the region, and it really does highlight how multifaceted it is. I'd like to ask our panelists, as we look to the rest of this year, what is the one development or dynamic that you're most concerned about when it comes to this crisis? And I actually ask you to just limit it to one. And Administrator Power, if I could start with you.
Thank you for the privilege of starting. I'm gonna do something cheeky, and I hope not set a precedent, which is I'm gonna do really quick 3.
Okay.
But I'm gonna do it because of the power of alliteration. Putin, panic, pretext. So Putin right now can open up the Black Sea and can, by so doing, add supply to global markets. And it just worries me that his indifference to the fate of the people of Ukraine above all, but all these ripple effects is, in the end, despite all the talk of potentially corridors, that's going to break down. And so that's a big worry, and it'll have, again, play a big role in these cascading effects, stipulating that, of course, the needs predated the war in Ukraine. Many needs predated. Panic, export controls, and the distortions on markets that are happening more and more as people, because we're still in the phase of thinking about these effects to come, but as these effects are felt by domestic populations, that pressure on leaders and the panic. And then third, and this is kind of the corollary to what Renata was saying, pretext, which is she mentioned the risk of social unrest. We already see in the hemisphere so many undemocratic trends that predated food insecurity in many communities, but where leaders are looking to consolidate power, undermine the rule of law. And given that there really will potentially be, civic unrest in light of what communities are going to be experiencing, that is likely in many, many countries to become articulated cause for further crackdowns on civil society, when what we want to see, what we need to see for the long-term economic health of the region and for a whole set of other reasons is those anti-democratic trends going in a more positive direction, which is, of course, one of the themes of the summit.
Thank you. You did it succinctly.
Sort of. Not that
Dr.
succinct.
Arturo, I'll go to you next.
Sí, yo querría compartir dos preocupaciones. La primera, los productores tienen que quedar en las zonas rurales. Tenemos que asegurar que las campañas agrícolas se mantengan, que no transformemos productores en consumidores, porque ahí se agrava la situación. Y el otro tema, yo creo que la comunidad internacional debería pensar alguna línea para ayudar a los países a reducir los niveles de hambre. Hambre significa la vuelta de enfermedades, significa hipotecar el futuro. ¿Qué van a hacer estos jóvenes cuando después vayan a la universidad? El hambre es algo tremendo, tremendo. Y entonces la agricultura, obviamente dirige una institución que insiste en que la agricultura tiene que ser el eje estratégico para nuevas estrategias de desarrollo sostenible. Gracias.
Thank you. Enrique?
Gracias, y tal vez parafraseando un poquito a Samantha en 3 palabras, serían, yo creo que acción, inversión y comunicación. Si no accionamos todo esto que hablamos en las cumbres, nada va a pasar. Si no invertimos en los países para que realmente la situación cambie, nada va a suceder. Y si no nos comunicamos precisamente para encontrar estos mecanismos de cooperación conjunta, creo que es tampoco lo que podamos.
Thank you so much. Gail?
Thank you. So if we're talking about worries for the year to come, rice is the only product that hasn't gone like totally crazy like wheat, corn, other cereals. But the pressure is very high because people are starting to use rice to feed animals and things like that. So the pressure is very high for rice. And with rice, we're actually benefiting from investment in science and innovation. A country like India, the most populated country in the world, is actually a major exporter of rice, wheat. They just cut out the wheat export, but they're maintaining their rice export, and they're protecting us. So I was mentioning, let's do no evil. So let's always think in the terms of crisis that we need to make sure that there are other countries like India and one day hopefully Haiti will be more food secure and will be producing more of its food so that we're shielded, all of us, from this type of crisis.
Great, thank you. And Renata?
I would say when countries are designing their security strategies, particularly on the countryside, make sure that you are not only concerned with captures or killing the enemies, but to protect the communities that are producing food. That is the only way in which migration and other phenomena like that is going to stop if we allow these communities to continue with their vocation of being rural communities.
Great. And for our last question, we know this week is about regional stakeholders, and we've seen representatives from governments, multilateral institutions, international financial institutions, in the private sector. So I think I'll start with you, Enrique, as we close out. What do you think would be the most impactful in terms of addressing either short or long-term challenges that are posed by acute food insecurity? What do you think those sectors could make commitments to that would have the greatest impact? Specific commitments like you mentioned.
Yo creo que en lo específico, y bueno, de esta cumbre tenemos un compromiso político para nuestro futuro sostenible y verde. Y entre ellos se enumeran una serie de acciones conjuntas, tanto de los estados, del sector privado y la sociedad civil, precisamente para crecer respetando estas materias y ver cómo en casos como Honduras se protegen selvas, que es una acción que la presidenta Castro está realizando. Entonces yo pienso que esa labor conjunta de los tres sectores debe ser muy fuerte. Debemos comunicarnos precisamente para accionar, porque si no trabajamos juntos será muy difícil transformar la realidad. Entonces yo creo que ese compromiso debe ir precisamente al trabajo conjunto de sociedad civil, sector privado y gobierno.
Great, thank you. Dr. Arturo?
Me parece que tenemos que aprovechar la atmósfera que hay en la cumbre y fortalecer la voluntad política para transformarla en consenso y el consenso en acción. El momento es ahora. Requerimos más comercio, más ciencia e innovación, creer en nosotros mismos, ser mucho más solidarios, construir puentes entre el Caribe y el resto del continente, lo mismo para los países centroamericanos, y aprovechar la lección y sentar las bases de una agricultura que tiene que ser intensiva en conocimiento, no hay duda de esto, pero tiene que tener un rostro humano y dar a la ruralidad el nivel y la jerarquía que tiene que tener siempre en una alianza rural-urbana.
Thank you so much. Renata, I'll go to you next.
Thank you. So when I got this invitation, I asked my team in the region, go ask the communities what they want to say, what message. So if you allow me, I'll tell you what they said. They said, along with food security, let's please discuss food sovereignty, because it is important that people can eat, but also that the cultural practices of producing this food are respected.
Great, thank you. Gail?
Thank you. So, like Manuel was saying, science innovation, but please don't let the scientists work in their bubble. So, science innovation, research, but also collaboration. So we need to get local organizations, researchers, companies, and buyers to work together. So if you were to fund them to work collaboratively and solving the issues of countries like Haiti's, but I think there are many other countries that need this type of collaborative work. Thank you.
Great. And Administrator Powell?
Thank you so much. Thanks for this great discussion, and to all of you for being here and the work you're doing on this essential issue. I'd say a couple of things. I mean, one, we USAID and we the U.S. government are fortunate because our Congress came together recently in a bipartisan way, which we don't always get to celebrate in the United States, behind a supplemental, that was of course triggered by Putin's war in Ukraine, but that makes additional resources available in order to meet food insecurity around the world that has been exacerbated by this war. And so this puts us in a position, both in terms of humanitarian assistance, which I completely agree is not the answer here, and I said as much, but also in terms of potentially having new resources to bring to bear, to make the kinds of investments that I think have been discussed, that we all recognize of what we're really talking about here, which is building resilience, sovereignty, and ability for countries to withstand what we know are going to be other shocks in the future. So I feel very fortunate that that has happened. It's not something that everybody could have anticipated even 2 or 3 months ago. But the same thing is not happening in other donor countries. So I would like out of this summit also for us collectively to put ourselves in a strong position to go to other countries and try to make up what is going to be a huge gap between the needs as they are unfolding, short-term and the longer needs, and that predated this crisis, and the resources that the public sector alone and governments like mine can bring to bear. And so that's back to collaboration and bringing the private sector into this. Kamala Harris has announced, Vice President has announced additional resources through the Partnership for Central America, bringing the private sector in specific ways across sectors, but thinking about a great degree of ambition around private sector collaboration, but also the Inter-American Development Bank, the economic partnership that's being launched this week by the leaders for food and agriculture to be central to all of the discussions about enhanced investment and trade. Sometimes it feels like it's off in the development space, but it needs to be central to these high-level economic discussions, and above all, the follow-through. And then the last thing I'd say is that out of this summit, where we have civil society fora, we have heads of state meeting, we have hybrid events like this one, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for joining me as a government representative in being here. But we really do need the governments of the region to view civil society as a partner in combating this crisis, and not simply as an irritant holding governments accountable for what they may or may not be doing perfectly. And that's a mindset challenge for anybody who's in government and has the experience of being criticized, but it really is essential, because civil society, and it's a broad term with lots of different versions of it, but in terms of actually meeting community needs in the here and now and innovating and collaborating, it is these local partnerships, local organizations who are closer to the people, who are going to need to be at the forefront of devising solutions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, let's give our great panel a round of applause. And on behalf of Pacific Council and USAID, I just want to thank you all for being here, both in person and virtually. Clearly, this is a global crisis that requires our leadership and collaboration. So thank you and have a great day.